Hello and welcome to this CBT Nuggets course entitled Microsoft Exam 70-412 Configuring Advanced Windows Server 2012 Services. My name is Tim Warner and I'm honored to be your instructor for this series. This is the introductory nugget to the series, and as such we'll cover the following topic areas. First, I'm going to define for you and describe the new MCSA and MCSE certifications. Over the last 12 to 15 years or so, Microsoft has shifted their IT Pro certification titles twice, and it can get confusing if you're new to this. So I want to make sure we're all on the same page, we understand how the certification program works, and we also understand how Exam 7412 fits into that schema. We'll next deep dive into the structure of this course. We'll get a bird's eye perspective, what you can expect to learn over the next 20 or so Nugget movies, and best practice suggestions that I have for you on how you can best absorb the material. Finally, we'll consider the 412 exam in some detail. I'll give you some certification exam success tips. I've been taking Microsoft exams since 1997. I've seen certs come and go, and I have a lot of good practical advice to give you in that regard. Let's get started, shall we? About the new MCSA and MCSE certifications. First, a little bit of history, friends. I got into the IT field full-time in 1997. This was around the vintage of Windows NT 4, Windows NT Workstation, Windows NT Server, and Windows 95 was the current consumer desktop OS, with Windows 98 just around the corner. At that time, IT Pro certification in Microsoft looked like this. If you passed a single technology exam, for instance, configuring Windows NT Server 4 or Windows 95 support, you earned what's called the MCP, Microsoft Certified Professional. And it was a nice logo to add to your business card, as well as a nice frameable certification for you to put on your wall in your office. The top tier IT Pro credential at the time was called MCSE, Microsoft Certified Systems Engineer. Now, at the time, the MCSE was the holy grail for Microsoft certifications. It had the same cachet, I dare say, as the Cisco CCIE does today. It was really very valuable and very prestigious. You had to pass a number of exams, between 6 and 7 tests, and they were difficult, believe me. Even more so when we transitioned out of Windows NT and into Windows 2000 Server, which gave us Active Directory, and then even further on, Windows Server 2003. Those exams were blisteringly tough, no question about it, and you had to work very hard and very diligently to earn that MCSE. When Windows 2008, Windows Server 2008 that is, was released, Microsoft completely changed up their certifications for IT Pro. Instead of a single exam conferring the Microsoft Certified Professional title, they changed it to MCTS, Microsoft Certified Technology Specialist. I think Microsoft's motives were twofold here. One, they wanted to give candidates the ability to more granularly define their skill set. For instance, they would have logos, or they do have logos, that say MCTS SharePoint Server, MCTS SQL Server, MCTS Windows Server 2008. You see what I mean? Whereas with MCP, it wasn't really clear exactly what your specialty was with Microsoft technologies, or if you even had one. The top tier credential in Windows Server 2008 is called the Microsoft Certified IT Professional, or MCITP. Now I have to tell you, I'm sure Microsoft would admit this if you talk to their learning folks. These titles never really caught on in the marketplace. I watched this very closely. Of course, I earned the MCITP very shortly after it was released. You have to stay on top of these things when you're a trainer, in addition to being a working systems administrator. And I would talk to HR managers and go to IT job sites like Dice.com, and I would always see references to MCP and MCSE, but I would hardly ever see references to these new certs. They just simply never caught on. Now, here we are, 2013. Microsoft has changed the playing field again with Windows Server 2012 certifications. They've actually gone back to some of the old titles, not MCP, but MCSA and MCSE. Now there's some trickery going on here, Actually, before I continue with that, let me step back once. I told you that Microsoft's shift into MCTS and MCITP had two motives. One was to do the more granular skill set thing, but the other, and let's be frank here, we have to understand certifications from the vendor's point of view. The more certification programs and the more certification exams you sell, the more revenue streams you have. You have to remember, friends, that although we as certification candidates definitely benefit by these certifications, the vendor benefits because this is a business for them. So instead of just a single exam track that has 4 exams, maybe they can develop multiple exam tracks with 4 required exams each. They can double and triple the revenue, you see. That's not necessarily being sarcastic or snarky. It's just looking at this situation from a more global perspective. Anyway, in 2012, we have this shift back to the original titles. Now, MCSA used to stand for Microsoft Certified Systems Administrator. They being Microsoft, brought the MCSA out around the Windows Server 2003 times. And I think the purpose of the SA on paper was this is the title you want if you're not necessarily an Active Directory architect, but instead you're doing in the trenches day-to-day implementation and operations tasks. In other words, the SA is meant to be the worker bee title, and the MCSE, the systems engineer, is meant to be the decision maker, the manager, the enterprise architect who's concerned more about design and implementation workflow than the actual click-by-click steps. At least that was on paper what was going on. But really, the MCSA, practically speaking, was a nice stepping stone because let's face it, for Windows Server 2003, you had to earn 7 exams. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of prep time. And it's nice that Microsoft would throw you a bone, so to speak. After passing 4 tests, you'd have the SA. So you'd at least have 1 solid, prestigious certification under your belt as you were on your way to earning the MCSE. Now we have a similar motif going on now in Windows Server 2012. We have the same initials, but they actually stand for very different things. Now it's Microsoft Certified Solutions Associate, and MCSE stands for Microsoft Certified Solutions Expert. Now, you think solutions, that can be confusing if you've been around Microsoft certification for a while, because historically Microsoft has used the term solutions in an application development framework. There's an entirely different suite of certifications with its own associated history, dealing with .NET development, solutions developer, and so forth. So what's Microsoft mean? Probably the best way for us to go about this is to jump into a web browser, and we'll go to a site that you should really have bookmarked. This is Microsoft.com/learning. I have to say, I receive email from my students all the time, just about every day, and believe me, don't stop sending it. I love communicating with you. But a lot of the questions that I receive, how many exams are required for this Microsoft certification? When is Microsoft planning on retiring such and so a certification? These questions can be answered easily on your own simply by going to the Learning website. Let's do that now. Here we are at the Microsoft Learning website. It's received a new coat of paint. If you haven't been here in the last year or so, it looks much different. Of course, you have the live tiles here that are meant to be a direct analog to our Windows 8 start screen, the Windows Xbox home screen, etc. But anyway, I find the most efficient way to browse this is to come to the top navigation area, hit Certification and Exams, and just simply start here, focusing on Windows Server as our technology. So you can look at global information. In particular, pay attention to the retired exam section if you've been with Microsoft certification for a while and you're wondering about the lifetime of your current certs, or if you're currently in a certification track and you want to make sure you're out of danger. We can look by technology, and then of course by title over here on the right. Now you'll notice here we have an entry for Private Cloud, System Center, and an entry for Virtualization. That gets into the notion of what the Solutions Associate and Solutions Expert titles mean. We're seeing a heavy emphasis by Microsoft on virtualization, on cloud infrastructures, public cloud, private cloud, hybrid cloud, and managing cloud-based infrastructure using the System Center tools. Okay? Now let's come over to the right and look up MCSA. And you'll see here that we can earn an MCSA in a variety of different technologies. Of course, we want the Windows Server 2012, so we'll click that tile, and it tells us what exams are required. It looks like 3 tests are required to earn the Solutions Associate in Windows Server 2012, and the Advanced Server Services, our test, is number 3. Now, if you're new to this, you do not have to take these exams in any order. It's up to you. Microsoft, I think, has increasingly been better about structuring their content on their learning site in a logical way. Sometimes it looks like exam topics are literally thrown together like confetti. But here, this makes sense to me. We would start with installing and configuring, then go to administering, and then our content is really advanced stuff. It's high-level stuff, so it's the third in this workflow. Let's come back to certifications and exams and go to MCSE, the Solutions Expert again. We have this title available for many Microsoft technologies. You're going to see here, again, think of revenue streams. 2 MCSEs for Windows Server 2012. Actually 4 if you count the ones that deal with cloud-based certifications. These are our successors to the original Windows NT Microsoft Certified Systems Engineer and Microsoft Certified IT Professional titles. You have server infrastructure and desktop. So are you focusing more on Active Directory design and server-side stuff, or are you more of a desktop deployment, maybe even a help desk manager kind of role? Let's go to server infrastructure. You see there's 5 tests required, of which 412 certainly is in the mix. The desktop infrastructure also requires 5, and there's overlap. So you'll see here that by studying and passing all exams for one track, you're well on the way to earning the other. Now, just between you and me, friends, should you go for both of these, given the fact that there's overlap? Frankly, unless you're a completist or have some other compelling requirement, mandate, or strong suggestion to do so, I would suggest you pick one or the other. Although IT managers out there know about the MCSE, they don't necessarily know, and I'm talking HR managers as well as sometimes information technology managers. They may not know or care whether you have an MCSE from Windows Server 2003 or 2012. That's just how it is. Now, the MCSE in 2003 is a dead duck. That's gone the way of the dodo, so you can forget about that. Those exams were much harder, in my humble opinion, than these Windows Server 2012 tests anyway, so let's count our blessings in that regard. So you can take my advice or not, but I would suggest you just go for one or the other, whichever best fits where you are career-wise. How does this CBT Nugget course work? Well, number 1, rest assured that I cover all of the exam objectives. So if we look up the 7412 exam at the Microsoft Learning website and go under Skills Measured, I build my outline directly from the one provided by Microsoft. That having been said, to look at the content specifically, this 412 exam is not for beginners. It actually seems to sweep up the shavings or take up what I call special cases in Windows Server 2012. We're not dealing with 7410 material. My colleague and friend James Conrad did a good job with that course. That's your basic introduction to Windows Server 2012. Here we're assuming that you already know the fundamental technologies, and we're just adding on to that baseline knowledge by looking at more special cases. The topics in brief, the general categories I've listed down in the lower right here. We have Advanced Network Services. That deals with stuff like network load balancing, or NLB, where we can spread load across 2 or more web servers. We get into File Services, failover clustering, disaster recovery, Microsoft Online Backup, bare metal restores, that kind of stuff. A lot on Dynamic Access Control, or DAC. That one we will do a pretty much a soup to nuts overview because it's such an important new feature, and I'm a fan of it personally, quite honestly. We'll do a lot in this course on managing virtual machines, managing VM movement, migrations, live migrations, all that kind of stuff. And we'll also deal with, in addition to Active Directory domain services, which in a sense undergirds all of Microsoft server technologies, we'll be dealing with certificate services and the dreaded federation services, which is, in my humble opinion, one of the most complex, if not the most complex, server role in Windows Server 2012. The nuggets are clustered as per the Microsoft outline. In other words, we'll be looking at themes starting with failover, NLB and failover clustering, and then moving on from there. I get the question, should I watch the nuggets in order? You can if you want to, but like I said, the nuggets are organized more or less in themes, and when you look at the nugget list at cbtnuggets.com, if you look at the 412 list, you should be able to see the start and stop of each section, and you can, if you want to, drill into a particular section first. This course is a little different from the more basic Microsoft certifications, because with the basic ones I tend to really work sequentially such that we build upon earlier knowledge as we go along. So it is more important for you to watch the nugget movies sequentially so you don't feel left out. Here it's a little bit more scattershot, so I think you're freer if you want to hop, skip, and jump through the outline. It's always up to you and your learning preference after all. Tips for certification exam success. Now, I mentioned a little bit earlier that, in my opinion, the later tests, that is to say Windows Server 2008, Windows Server 2012, are perceived by seasoned certification folks as easier since Microsoft began outsourcing item development. Back in the Server 2003 days and before that, Server 2000 and NT, Microsoft would hire contractors, technical authors, technical trainers to write items, and they would pay buku dollars for each item. Now, when you're working for high dollars, you tend to, in general, let's look at human nature here, produce a more complex, harder item, let's say, for lack of a better term, more difficult item, than if you're outsourcing and you're paying a team a much smaller amount of money per item. Really, that's just business, quite honestly. Now, I don't want to offend any of you. That's the last thing I want. I did receive an email once from a student who said, yeah, I saw one of your nuggets where you said that in your opinion the Server 2008 tests were easier. Isn't that a relative term? What might be easy to you as a seasoned expert is anything but easy to me as a beginner. And that's fine. I accept that and I honor that. I guess I'm just focusing this first bullet point on those who have already been through the Server 2003 tests. I think you'll find a difference in item quality and item complexity in the Server 2012 items as compared to what you saw years ago. I'll leave it at that and we'll move on. Regardless of your background with certification, you're going to find on the 412 test, as well as all of our current Server 2012 and Windows 8 cert exams, a heavy emphasis on PowerShell commandlet identification. It should come as no surprise to you that Microsoft feels strongly about PowerShell for automation and command line use of the operating system. So there's really no excuse and no choice for us as administrators but to become expert at PowerShell. My colleague at CBT Nuggets, Don Jones, does a great job with his many Nugget series on PowerShell. If you're a CBT Nugget subscriber, please invest the time in his training. As I have. I've studied all of his training myself and I've benefited greatly from it. And this skill in PowerShell is going to come to you not in just in your daily life, which is really most important, but also on these certification exams. It's most important that you understand or be able to identify the commandlets that are necessary in a given scenario. You won't necessarily be asked for detailed syntax. After all, PowerShell has such rich help built into it, you're almost not expected to know the parameters of any given commandlet by memory. The other heavy emphasis on these exams are new and changed features and functionality. Look at this from Microsoft's standpoint. They have a new version of Windows 8 on the desktop and Windows Server 2012. They understand that the people who are sitting for their exams are, in a sense, unpaid tech evangelists, that these certification candidates are going to go out and perhaps implement Server 2012 in Windows 8 and talk about it with their colleagues, with their constituents, with their bosses. So of course we're forced, when we're studying, to focus on what's new and what's changed. Microsoft wants us to use the new features of Windows Server 2012, so we can expect to see emphasis there. I also want to give you a heads up to remember that we have CBT Nuggets practice tests available for subscribers. We come out onto the web again, onto the website. Once you've logged in and you go to the video training area where you can look up training courses, you'll see on the secondary navigation we have exam prep. Now, I'm not promising you that there'll be certification practice tests for 7412 by the time you're watching this nugget. After all, the exam is brand new. But what I am saying is please keep checking back the exam prep list and you can search through the practice exams here. And eventually you should find it there. And I think that taking the practice exam is a necessary step besides A, understanding the theory, and B, getting necessary hands-on practical experience with the technology. That all three of those, practice exams, hands-on, and theory, are requisite for you passing the test. All right, let's review what we learned, and then we'll kick off the training proper. We started with a discussion of the MCSA and MCSE certifications. You now should understand a bit about the history of these titles and exactly how the 7412 test fits into the new generation of the SA and SE. You understand how I've structured the course. I've given you some tips and tricks on how to address the material. And I've also, speaking of tips and tricks, offered you some advice on how to prepare for the certification exams, paying particular attention, as I said, to PowerShell implementation and new and changed features. Without any further ado, I think it's time for us to put our thinking caps on and get into this content. Are you excited? I am. Let's do this. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.